All right, so today's class is this is more of a fun class. We're going to talk a lot about tips on how to design your garden, how to plant your garden, how to maintain your garden, things like that. We'll talk about like the easy crops, crops to deal with if you're having theft issues, how to build trellises and things like that. Yeah, plugged in a couple of really cool short videos as well to kind of talk about some really cool tips on. But yeah, it's in three sections: planting and maintenance, basically. So we'll start out with planting. So the most important thing about when you're planting your garden, even though it may seem redundant every year once you get used to it, but it's just so important to have a garden design plan. And you could, I mean, it could be anything. It could just be, a bunch of circles and squares, with what you're planting in it. Square foot gardening plan, looks, it does not, have to be as crazy as this, but, you can get detailed, you can do artistic. But it's so important to have these plans, and you don't have to stick with these plans. You can, but try to adapt them because, well, one, we're going to talk about crop rotation today, and that's really important, and that helps to have plans because you can't. It's hard to remember exactly where you planted what every year, and it just helps you kind of like design your garden more every year to figure out what worked well in certain areas, what didn't, and every year you can kind of design it a little bit better. So it may seem tedious, but definitely have some kind of plan and keep that, have a folder, a binder or something where you can keep, all your plans, so you can look at that and see, and you'll see patterns over the years if you start recording this stuff. And it's really important. Well, not really important, but it will help you a lot if you do this. And then also we talked about this. So this section we're going to talk about what to plant and things. So for sure, definitely think about double check when to plant what. Like right now we're in the cool weather season, and we'll our next class I believe is a calendar class, so we'll talk more about that and how exactly that fits in. But yeah, I mean these are things we're planting right now, and ideally like the really hardy stuff you can plant mid-March. Like cabbages and spinach and stuff. And then, but most things, they say for this area, you should plant April 1st. But I don't know. I think you can get away with it, planting most of your stuff mid-March if there's no really harsh winter coming. Like, so we're planting a lot this week, but it doesn't look like anything's too bad, knock on wood's coming. But also I have some like, I have, covers and stuff if in case it is, so I can cover my crops. But if you want to play it safe, just wait till April 1st, and then you can plant any of these things April 1st. And then for these things though, your warm weather stuff, if a frost touches anything in the plant, the cells will explode and they'll die. So they can't survive one minor frost. These plants actually they do this really cool thing where, if a frost comes, they actually convert a lot of carbohydrates to sugars in their cells, and they create sugar water in their cells, and that actually freezes at a lower temperature, so they're able to survive frost. And these things are a lot more sweeter. Like if you ever had collards that it's been nipped by a frost the day before, it's super sweet. It's yeah, so they taste a lot better. And there's some flexibility with these. You can plant these throughout the summer if you give it a little bit of shade and water it really well. We'll talk a little bit more about that today in other classes. But there's no flexibility with this. If you plant these too early and the frost comes, they're going to die unless you can cover them up really well. But yeah, so about mid-May is typically, a lot of people say Mother's Day, which is like kind of the beginning of May-ish. But and if you want to be super safe, wait to June 1st, because it was like maybe a decade ago there was a frost, a late frost that was like it was like middle of May, and so many people lost stuff, because they were trying to get that head start. But I mean I doubt, I mean our climate seems to be going in the other direction, so I think you're good mid May. But like I said, if you want to play it safe, June 1st for these things. And then then you wait till you can plant these in the fall again, the cool weathers, which August, September is when you want to start planting these. But we'll talk more about this in the calendar class. But you may have to, fall crops are a tough choice because you got you may have tomatoes that are still producing, and then but if you want some fall collards, you're gonna have to rip out your tomatoes, or half and half or whatever. So we'll talk more about that next class. But that's a good idea when you're planning your garden. Make sure when you're making your garden design, make a spring design, make a summer design. And also this, I mean, if you're a first time gardener, I kind of just recommend just wait until May and do a summer garden. You know, you don't have to do a spring garden. I typically tell people, you know, just do a summer garden and grow it until it dies, and then throw a bag of mulch on your garden, you know, your soil. That's a good way to start out. And then once you get the hang of it, you can start incorporating. You know, a spring garden, you know, works well. You know, it's easier to incorporate. And then the fall gardens are tricky, and winter gardens are tricky. But yeah, if you're like, oh, this is too much for me, just focus on these plants. Pick the ones you like. You know, buy a couple bags of compost, mix it everything up, plant, and then just grow them and water them until they die. Um, Cool. So yeah, so on that note, you know, I made a slide of just like things that are typically easier to plant. It doesn't mean they're super easy. You know, you still have to do some maintenance and water them and stuff, but these typically be a lot. This is a list of a lot easier plants. You know, root crops tend to be, as long as you have really fluffy soil and you take the time to kind of till it up, you know, root crops are easy. You know, beans and peas are super easy. You plant by seed and they just grow like crazy. You know, lettuces and spinaches, kale and chard. You want to be like careful with brassicas in this area. Brassicas can, you know, brassicas is a family. I'll show you a list of all the different crops. Some of the brassicas are really hard. Like, I mean, collards and cabbages. It's not like they're hard, but there's a lot of pests in this area, like harlequin beetles and cabbage loopers. And so you do need to be, you know, just be, you need to be able to identify the pests for those crops if you want to grow those. But kale and chard, I mean, they seem to grow really well. Even in the summer, they seem to be doing, you know, do well. But I think the easiest thing is like get things that are small fruiting. You know, like this is my favorite tomato plant is a sun gold. They have, you know, cherry tomatoes, the small tomatoes. It's so plentiful, but at the same time, I mean, you know, they ripen super quickly. So you don't, I mean, as opposed to like a big beefsteak tomato where, you know, it's just such a long period for it to ripen that, you know, someone could steal it, you know, it can crack, it can, you know, have pests and diseases and things like that. So small things, if you want to go easy, go small things, you know, cherry tomatoes, you know, peppers, do like the jalapenos, you know, box, you know, peppers and stuff. The small peppers are so much easier than the big peppers. Eggplants, you know, there's lots of small eggplants, mini eggplants. Chinese eggplants are these like small, narrow ones. Italian eggplants are like the, you know, kind of the size of a baseball. Those are you typically easier than your you know, big eggplant. You know, summer squash is like, you know, big bush, a plentiful. You know, it's just, yeah, it produces so well. Okra is probably the easiest thing ever. If you like okra, you know, and you're worried, just plant a bunch of okra. The hardest part about okra is harvesting it quick enough before it gets too woody. And we'll talk about it in the harvesting class, but you want to get it when it's like 4 or 5 inches when it's tender, because then if it reaches 6 and 7 inches, it gets woody and there's not a whole lot you can do with them. You know, strawberries are great, and most like herbs and you know, things like that. But you know, mint is like the easiest thing to do. But if anyone's ever grown mint in the garden plot, you know what I'm talking about. It just blows up and just takes over. So if you grow mint, you know, do it in a self-contained container where it can't escape, because it will definitely dominate. Oh yeah, so, yeah. So Stacy said I planted 2 zucchini plants last year, which was definitely a mistake because they're so, yeah. I mean, summer squash. So zucchini is part of the summer squash, and they just are so plentiful. So yeah, definitely. If anyone else has any like things that they think is really easy, feel free to include, you know, type that in the chat, to give some other people some ideas. And then you know, just you know, community gardens, urban farms, things like that. I mean, we're living in a city, we're living surrounded by density of, you know, lots of people, you know, as opposed to a rural area where you don't even see your neighbors. I mean, you know, there's going to be theft, you know, and it's just something. I mean, like if you could do it in your yard and you got a nice privacy fence and stuff like that, maybe you're good. But you know, if you're doing a community garden, I mean, some community gardens have, you know, nice fencing and stuff, but a lot of them are kind of open. So there's going to be theft, you know. So just, you know, if you know there's going to be theft, you know, plan ahead. Like don't plan. I see this every year, and it's so sad where someone wants to grow melons or cantaloupe or something, watermelon, and they're so excited, but it takes so long, and then like a week before it's ripe, so someone steals all their fruit, and it's just like it's devastating, like it really is. So I mean, if you like in your open community garden, avoid the things that take a long time to grow. Avoid big melons. If you really want melons, do baby melons, do small ones that ripen really quickly. Avoid the big, melons. Avoid the big peppers and eggplants and corn. Like I've grown corn a couple times and I've never gotten an ear, because you only get like 1 or 2 ears, and like yeah. But then, like, think about, things that grow quickly, that are small, like, again, like, it's very similar to, like, a lot of these things are also easy, is like cherry tomatoes, mini eggplants, jalapenos, okra, root crops, a lot of, if they're in the ground, not everyone can identify what a root crop looks like was in the ground, the same with potatoes and sweet potatoes. I love these tomatoes. These are called green zebra tomatoes. Well, one, they're delicious. They're tangy. They're really good at like tomato sandwiches and stuff. But they ripen. This is a ripe one. I mean, they ripen when they're still pretty green. So if someone's lurking around your garden and looking for your ripe tomatoes, they're going to wait too long for these, and you can get them. So that works great. But also think about, there's a lot of beautiful heirloom tomatoes that aren't, or plant, vegetables that aren't typical to look like what they look like in the grocery store. There's beautiful heirloom tomatoes that are like, purple, black, all different kinds of colors, that, may confuse people that don't know a whole lot about gardening, so definitely think about that. And then, all right, yeah, garden herbs. So definitely, it's a good idea. We're going to talk more about this with the pest and disease classes, but one of the best ways to handle pests and diseases is to create a healthy ecosystem, where you want to have a lot of beneficial insects and a lot of native pollinator plants and flowers and things like that. So it's always a good idea to try to keep about a quarter of your garden for herbs and native flowers. You can spread it around. It doesn't have to be all one chunk. You can spread it around. You can do a perimeter. But just having a bunch of different perennial herbs. So perennial are things that establish themselves and they last for many years. You may have to divide them and things like that because they get really woody. But like lavender and rosemary and thyme and oregano. I mean, definitely, all these things, you can buy them by seeds and grow them, in your house, and or just buy like a $3 plant in your garden, and that could be with you for like 20 years. So definitely think about, I love printing. I always, as a windbreak, I'll plant all my perennial plants on the outside of my garden, and then plant all my annuals on the inside. But definitely think about perennials. Yeah. And then there's a lot of annual herbs, anise, cilantro is a good cool weather. Parsley is a biannual. Parsley is a little difficult. It takes forever to germinate, and it takes 2 years to really get productive. But if you like parsley, it's definitely worth it. And then warm weather annuals, and things like that. Um, okay, so there's a question about potatoes. We're actually gonna have a slide on potatoes, so we'll talk more about potatoes in a second for sure. And then native flowers, nectar sources. So this is really important. We call them like beneficials or beneficial insects. So these are your ladybugs and things like that, that look all cute, but in fact in the bug world they're like ferocious. They will just destroy your pests, like your aphids and white flies and things like that. So you want to attract, you want to have, but they'll eat all your aphids, and then if there's no nectar, they'll fly away. But if you have all these like nectar sources, especially perennial nectar sources, they'll hang around and have babies, and you'll have lots of ladybugs, and then you'll have no aphid problems. So definitely think about, like I said, quarter of your garden, herbs and native plants. So I wrote a whole bunch of different ones here. I don't know a whole lot about flowers, and to be honest, we're getting more into it. We did a lot of cut flowers last year, and we're going to do a lot more this year. I'm excited about it, but these are just ones I know from my friends, and that work really well. And dill is fantastic, and it's an herb that that will actually, yeah, that when it flowers, it attracts all kinds of beneficial insects. We did a whole row of zinnias last year, and like I was just so blown away by zinnias. So zinnias are beautiful cut flowers that just like you plant them in seed and they blow up, and they just I mean, we got like, I don't know, like maybe like 40 or 50 flowers per plant, that we just cut every week and get, so I'm a big fan of zinnias. Definitely check those out. But yeah, those are annuals, and then you have your perennials as well. So let's see, there's a couple questions. See, does anyone have issues with rats eating fruits and veggies? They are a major pest in my neighborhood. Deer would be so much more scenic. Yeah, so I mean, um, yeah, so we'll definitely have a mammals class where we'll talk about all the techniques that you could do with like rats are an issue, and rats, squirrels, deer, birds are like the main things. I mean, rats probably the least amount, because rats, I mean, they're not attracted to your garden, even a lot of people think they are, but they're not. They're more attracted to like rotting food. So if there's dumpsters, if your garden's close to a dumpster, they may hang out in a dumpster, and then they'll venture into your garden, and then they'll eat like sweet potatoes and tomatoes and things like that. But definitely, I mean, as long as I would get rid of like the smelly things, like bad compost. If you have bad compost, get rid of that. That's really smelly, because that's going to attract rats, because they like that smelly stuff. A lot of times too, it's if there's we have so much construction, if they like bulldoze demolish a building, where rats were hanging out there, then you all of a sudden you have this flood of rats, and so but we'll talk a lot about the rats in our pest class. But if anyone needs tips, sooner, just email me, and I'll share the slides with you first. Um, See, I buy my seeds, potatoes, garlic from a nursery in Oregon. Territorial Seeds. Yeah, Territorial Seeds is a fantastic place to get your stuff. He says the biggest problem I have are birds. They take one bite in a tomato and then move on to the next. Yeah, so when they do that, and when they only take one bite out of a tomato or a peach or something, a lot of times, especially with squirrels, they're just thirsty. So they just open it up a little bit and drink out of it and knock it off, and then they get thirsty again and attack a whole nother tomato. So we'll talk about different ways to deal with that, from adding water features and things like that, to what different ways to like kind of scare them away or deter them. Squirrels for sure. Squirrels are pretty, yeah. So yeah, like I said, we'll have a whole 2-hour class on basically squirrels, birds, deer, and some rats, and then some moles and gophers and stuff. So the last question: do you have examples of native plants and the best ways to acquire them? Um, so all of these, well, actually, I don't know all of these are native. A lot of these are native. There's some really great native catalogs for the area. I don't remember the name of them. If you send me an email, I'll send them to you. They're like free downloadable catalogs. And then to get them is kind of hard. There's a couple native nurseries like Earth Sanga, which is in northern Virginia. There's a couple native small native nurseries in Northern Virginia. And then most nurseries have native plants, but they also have other plants as well. You need to know what's native or not. And then we're really trying to work with so UDC built a native nursery a couple years ago, but they've been kind of struggling on how to maintain it and staff it and things like that. So we're actually going to start working with them a little bit to try to help grow more native plants for DC. If anyone's interested in joining us, and definitely send me an email. I don't know when we're going to get started. We're kind of working on some game plans right now, but eventually we're going to we're going to need help kind of with managing this native nursery. The native nursery is at their Bernie Bacchus campus off of South Dakota Avenue. So yeah, definitely check it out. But email me. I can give you more details, but I want to make sure we get through all these slides first. But yeah, so hopefully, that will be a big source for native plants, because we definitely need to have some kind of native nursery here. So the next thing I want to talk about is crop rotation. So this is something to think about after you've been farming and gardening for a little while. If you plant the same plants in the same spot every year, it's just going to, it's going to suck up the same nutrients. It's not going to be replenished as well, and you're going to deplete the soil of certain nutrients. And at the same time, all the pests in the neighborhood know that if I go to this one spot, there's always going to be tomatoes there. So that's why you want to think about crop rotations. Think about different ways to kind of move it. And this is like if you're a first time gardener, I would just say crop rotation, easiest thing. Just don't plant the same thing in the same spot every year. Kind of mix it up. You don't have to think about a 4-year rotation or anything. Just, if you have a 4x8 raised bed, plant certain plants on one side and certain plants on the other, and then swap them every year. So it could be as little as that. But ideally, you want to get on a 4-year rotation, where basically, like if you plant tomatoes in this one, corner of your garden, then every year you plant in a different garden, because the tomatoes take up different nutrients. And then you have, root vegetables in there when you have leafy greens, and then you have really important to try to incorporate legumes. So we talked a little bit about legumes, but legumes are like beans and peas and clover, peanuts. They're nitrogen fixers. So they actually, all these other things take from your garden, but legumes actually add to your garden. So it's nice to have one of these spots to be peas in the spring, then beans in the summer. A lot of times you can grow those beans out, or you can get a quick fall pea crop, and then put some white clover down for winter. And then you do that every spot, you rotate it around every 4 years, and it adds nutrients throughout your garden. So it's definitely something to think about. Like I said, you don't have to get, if you're not, if you don't want to think about this too much, just don't, just mix it up every year. Plant your plants in a different spot every year. But if you really want to get involved with this, especially if you have a lot of pest issues, this will help you with pest issues. If you have a large plot, not so much if it's like a 4x8 plot, but if you have a large garden, moving putting all your tomatoes in one spot, and then moving it around is going to confuse your pests, because a lot of pests will put their eggs in the spot in the soil where the plants they like, with the hopes that those, they'll hatch, and then they'll just crawl right to it. But if you mix it around, you can confuse them a little bit. So there's a couple things to think about when you do crop rotation. So a couple of things to think about, heavy feeders versus light feeders, like things like, a lot of your leafy greens, even though they seem small, they actually suck up tons of nitrogen. Tomatoes are big feeders, eggplants are big feeders. And then you have light feeders, like carrots and, sweet potatoes and things that don't take up a whole lot. So one way you can have heavy feeders and light feeders and just kind of mix them around. But another way to think about it is try to put all your crops, try to keep your crops into their vegetable families. So you have beetroot families, cucurbits, or cucumbers and melons. Brassica is a big one. I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of this stuff is kind of it's too much for me to handle, but I do this with brassicas. Not too much to handle. It's just like it's too much for me to think about. I'm just like, whatever. I just plant and then move them around. But brassicas is important. So brassicas is like your broccoli, your collards, your cabbage, kale. That's really important to do for because to keep them all in one spot is because you have a lot. Like I said, I have all these plants. I would say brassicas have the most pests in the area, and that's why it can get a little difficult. I mean, we'll talk about, there's a really easy things you could do to protect your brassicas, but that's why it's nice to kind of just have them all in one clump, and then I move them around to kind of confuse the bugs that are overwintering, as opposed to like spread them all around, and then it can't really do much. So, but yeah, like I said, a lot of this stuff, you can get crazy on this stuff. You can not. I think the two biggest things is like have a spot, legume spot, and then move that around. That's probably the most important thing, because that's going to add, refertilize your garden. And then brassicas is another one. Have a, plump your brassicas together and move them around. Everything else, you can do a 4-year crop rotation, or you could just, like I said, plant things in different spots every year. So a couple questions. Let's see. For perennial plants, do you also rotate them, uproot and rotate? No. Definitely keep your perennials in the ground. Some perennials, they can't survive the winter. I think I listed some of those. Yeah, so some primroses like lemon balm, lemongrass, marjoram, they're not made for this climate. So you do want to dig them up and put them in a container and then keep them in your basement. I dry them out and keep them in a cool, dark place, and then they go dormant, and then bring them back out in the spring. Um, we'll talk more about that in other classes, but so that you could rotate if you wanted to. But really, I mean, I think perennials are fine. I mean, I don't think you don't need to rotate them. You can keep them, in the same spot. Let's see. How do you handle bugs like squash bugs and white flies? So we will have another class all on bugs. But squash bugs, I mean, really, I squish most of them, or if you don't like squishing bugs, you can knock them in the soapy water. There's different sprays that you can use for squash bugs that work well, like the kaolin and clay. It's this organic clay spray. You spray it on, and the squash bugs hate it, and they won't, squash bugs, if you can, they lay their eggs. If you can find their eggs first, they lay them usually on the bottom side of the leaves. If you can find their eggs and squish them, I think the best thing you could do for pests is just like, every other day, just walk through your garden, spend about 10 minutes, look on the underside of, underneath the leaves, and try to find eggs and flies and just hand squish them. White flies, yeah. I mean, you could spray them, neem oil, things like that. Like I said, we're gonna dive really deep into that on the pest class. If you want, I can share the slides beforehand if you're having an issue sooner. But um, yeah, okay. And then companion planting is another thing to kind of plan around. So this is when like plants kind of work together with themselves. And my favorite companion planting or like doing a border of garlic, because garlic's kind of a weird season. You plant garlic in like October, and then it comes up in the next year, and then or it might come up a little earlier, and then you harvest it in end of June. So it's just awkward, kind of, what do you follow with that, kind of thing. So it's the kind of nice to just have, garlic, as a border, and garlic also, keeps, different like bad nematodes. There's good and bad nematodes, but it keeps like bad nematodes and different insects away. Is pungent. So having like borders of like onions and garlics and things that can keep insects away. Basil and tomato. Everyone says like basil. If you plant basil by tomatoes, the tomatoes will taste better. I don't know if that's been a proven fact, but a lot of people seem to think that. I don't know. um it tastes the same to me, but it couldn't hurt. So and then like a lot of people like these a really popular like Three Sisters garden is indigenous garden that where you plant corn, and when the corn gets knee high, you seed squash and beans, and the beans will climb up the corn. They'll use them as a stalk, and then the squash will act as a cover crop, and they all kind of work together to refertilize the soil and stuff. It's pretty good. But then there's like bad combos and stuff. I don't really know a whole lot about this. I know there's this fantastic book called Carrots Love Tomatoes. If you really want to get into companion planting, definitely check that out. And we do have a library in our tool share, which we're opening up. We're actually partnering with a community group that's going to run our tool share hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, if you are interested, we have a whole list of books and things. We'll get that out soon. More info. And then the last thing I want to talk about planting is this thing called succession planting. So this is definitely, it's not a first year garden thing. It's definitely, you need to be, kind of know what you're doing. But the idea behind this is like, let's say I really love lettuce and I want to have, a fresh batch of lettuce every week, also, all spring long. Well, if I plant this whole thing full of lettuce, then it's all going to ripen at the same time, and we'll be flooded with lettuce for a short period, and I'm not going to have a whole lot, throughout the spring. But if you just plant, you plant one row, wait a week, plant a second row, wait a week, plant a third row, and the idea is every week you'll have a whole bunch to harvest. So yeah, I don't know. If I never actually, I just kind of, I just plant everything at once. But I mean, if you're really, if you really want a lot of one thing, or if you have a huge amount, a lot of people like commercial farms will do this because they want to, capture that peak ripeness, and then get your, so it's definitely, yeah. I mean, it's up to you. But like I said, it's not really like a first year garden thing. All right, so now we plan things out. We kind of know what we want to plant, what we want to plant where. Working on design and things. So now we're ready to go. Let's talk about some planting tips. We showed this in the last class, but most seed packets have all the instructions that you need. They'll tell you how long to harvest, they'll tell you how deep to put the seed, how many days of germination, how big the plant is, spacing. Row spacing is not so big of a deal. I think if you're doing commercial, you want to get the row spacing just right. But uh, you know, yeah, I mean, I think it's more, yeah, the plant spacing is more important. Like how far, apart do I want to plant this, the plants. It's pretty important. And they'll give you instructions oftentimes, like carrots, a lot of times you just kind of make a trench and you just sprinkle them in there, and then they grow really thick and you have to thin them out. Yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, seed packets, definitely read your seed packets. Some seed packets don't have instructions, but you can definitely, Google it. Like a farmer's almanac, or different, colleges with extensions, have lots of great information to kind of help, fill you in. And we talked about germination rate. That's the rate, the chances that it's going to seed. So if you have new seeds, they all have to be like, upper 90s. I mean, they have to be like guaranteed. Majority of these seeds are going to, germinate in your first year. So usually, like, some people still do 2 seeds per hole, but I do 1 per hole. And then if it doesn't germinate, I'll come back and reseed it. But every year it goes down. So the second year is probably maybe 70%. Third year is probably 50%. And up to like 5 years. After about 5 years, I mean, it's a crapshoot if it's gonna, if it's going to germinate or not. If you have older seeds, the more seeds you want to put in a hole, just to, double your odds. And then if you're storing seeds, just keep them in airtight, containers or Ziploc bags or things like that, in a cool, dark place. And then seedlings, or what some people call them, transplants. So ideally, you want to get, we'll talk about a few things you want to direct seed, but most of these you want to get plants as transplants. Like if you plant a tomato seed in your garden and in mid-May, I mean, you may get some tomatoes in September, but if you plant a big, nice, healthy seedling in mid-May, you can get, maybe early July, you can start, harvesting tomatoes. So really, if you want to, try to get as many seedlings, as possible to really increase your production. But when you're, you can, like, we had our last class was all about, growing your own seedlings, but if you need to buy your seedlings, just a couple of things you want to look for. One is like, these are, even though they look fragile, a lot of them are pretty, are stronger than they look. So if you grab them by the base and you can kind of pull them out a little bit, and then that's what you want a seedling to look like. You can see the roots; these white things are the roots, but it's not too crazy, But if you if you leave a seedling in the pot for too long, you don't pot it up. This is what it looks like, and this is bad. If you see something like this, don't buy it, because it's an unhealthy root structure. I mean, if you accidentally get one of these, you want to really kind of, with your hands, kind of, carefully kind of tease out and pull apart all the roots so they start growing outward. Because right now the roots are growing in a circle, and they're going to keep on growing in a circle, and it's just going to be an unhealthy structure. So you definitely want to have something like this versus this. Yeah, you don't want like big, tall, leggy ones. Don't do it. You want like short and stout. Look for a yellowing. Things like that. Crowding out. If there's a lot of them in there, sometimes that's a good thing, because you can think about that. Well, that's 3 plants. You could buy this, pull these apart, and then you have a lot more. But if it's been crowded for too long, these guys may look, kind of sick. And I remember when I first, I used to buy tomato plants that I would see with like a already a tomato, like a cherry tomato growing. I was like, oh, I would get excited and buy that. But don't buy seedlings that have fruit. They shouldn't be fruiting, until they're well established, or it's just going to take energy away from the root systems. All right. So So like I said, try to get as many things as possible by seedlings or grown, but then there's certain things that you want to grow by seeds or direct seed, which is basically you taking the seed from a pack and putting it straight into the ground. So legumes, beans and peas, I mean, you could buy them as seedlings, but they just grow so quickly that it's just not really worth it. I mean, you get a packet of beans for a couple bucks, or you can buy one bean plant for a couple bucks. So it's yeah. I would direct seed them, and same with cucurbits. You can get cucurbits as seedlings, and you want to be really gentle. I mean, their roots are very they don't transplant really well, but if you're really gentle, it will work. Um, and then sometimes also like in greenhouses and stuff, if we have rats and mice love cucurbit seeds, so that's a pain in the butt. So then if you have rat issues, they might be eating your if you direct seed them. But for the most part, I would just use you direct seed these guys, because then they grow so quickly. Corn, all these things you can, I've seen people do it, but I just recommend, like, corn just doesn't transplant very well. So if you do seedlings, you just want to be very careful with corn, but most people will plant it, direct seed it. And then the root vegetables don't do well, direct seeded, or don't do well transplants. And then like I wrote dense loose leaf lettuce planting. So lettuce, loose leaf lettuce. So there's a couple different kinds of lettuces. You can get lettuce in big heads or bibs. Like the romaine or the butter, what something. But then you can also get loose leaf lettuce where you're really trying to it's something that's got tons of leaves, and you can harvest a little bit at a time. You can or the whole thing. We'll talk about different ways to harvest loose leaf. But you can, people do, transplant lettuce, but I'm going to show you a video after this about how to, do loose leaf as like a dense direct seed. So it's up to you with this, but I'll show you a video about that makes it, it talks about, what you can do if you direct seed them. And then like some flowers, I'm learning more about flowers. I don't know a lot, but some cut flowers, they don't do well transplanted, so it's recommended to direct seed them. They'll tell you on the package, usually if you can transplant them or direct seed them. But so these are things, like I said, you can't, if you want to go ahead and try seedlings, it's fine, but these are typically the things that most people direct seed. But everything else you would want to get seedlings for. All right, so I'm gonna play this video. It's just a couple minute video that talks a little bit more about lettuce planting, and different types of ways you can plant it. But really talks about how you make these like high density, lettuce direct seed lettuce rows that they don't get as big, lettuce, but they're very productive. So yeah, I'll just play the video.
In this quick video, you're going to learn the best way to grow lettuce to ensure a high amount of output in a small amount of space. Over the years, I've tested several methods, from transplanting to harvesting the full lettuce head and letting it grow back again, from transplanting to only harvesting the outer layers, and then from the high intensity direct sowing and cut and come again. Now I'll review what the best method is and how to do it. This is Tim from Organic Backyard Gardening. The benefits of transplanting ensures a head start. However, you don't want to plant them too closely when transplanting. I plant my lettuce 4 per square foot. It takes several weeks until you get a full head that's ready to harvest, and another few weeks for it to regrow another head. Alternatively, you could just harvest the outer leaves, and I found between these two methods, harvesting the outer leaves gives you a little bit more output. But the best method I find is really the direct sowing, very tightly and intensively. And this requires the least amount of work because you don't have to start your seeds inside. So let's take a look at how I do this. You're going to dig small trenches about 6 to 8 inches apart, and you're going to sow your seeds very heavily in those trenches. Do not thin the seedlings. They're going to grow something like this, very tightly. Since they're so compacted tightly, they're not going to get to full maturity. But you can begin to harvest as soon as they're several inches high, like about this size. You're then going to harvest across the rows. This will allow the front to continue to regrow, and you'll continually harvest further back, further back. With this method, you'll have a continuous harvest of lettuce. You'll get a way higher output. You don't need to start your seedlings indoors. The only thing you'll need is a lot more seeds, but when you start to buy a larger quantity of seeds, they become less expensive. When you're doing this, also make sure that the seedlings stay moist at the beginning when they're young. If they don't stay moist, they'll dry up. I like to use this method in any free nooks and crannies of the garden. In this example, I have them sown right next to my celery. I found with this method, the plants are much more durable and they bolt much slower as opposed to the transplanting. If you like this,
All right. So whenever I play a video, I post the actual YouTube title and the thing. So if you want to go back and check it out, and a lot of these, people are making lots of really great videos as well. But I just want to post it, and we're gonna have a whole class on harvesting, so we'll talk more about the different techniques of harvesting lettuce. But I just want to give you a if you're deciding, do I want a direct seed lettuce or do I want to transplant lettuce? There was, this was a great video. It kind of talked about, the different ways you can do, loose leaf lettuce. All right. And so the best time to think about is when, another time to think about is when you're actually planting, like what's the best time to plant, and when. So ideally you want to have a cool day, a cloudy day. If it's super sunny, you could dry out your seedlings before, while you're transplanting, non-windy. You definitely don't want to plant after like when your soil is wet, because what's going to happen is you're going to step on different, maybe if you raise beds, not so bad, but I mean, if you're planting the ground, you're going to compact. When you plant in wet soil, you end up compacting that stuff really bad, and it's hard to uncompact it at that point. So definitely you want to kind of stay out your garden as much as possible, when it's like when it's super, soaked and saturated. So ideally, yeah, late afternoon, evening, or if you can't do it, in the morning, you want to avoid that super hot point, especially in the summer. If you're doing like in May, you're doing, you want to avoid that hot part of the day, mainly because you don't want to dry out your seedlings. But I mean, if you have to, like your life's not perfect, so sometimes you have to, the only time you can plant is like in the middle, is like mid-May, at noon when sun's the highest. That's the only time I have, to plant. So you can come up with, like bring out an umbrella, things like that. You add a little shade. You just don't want to leave your transplants in the hot sun for more than a couple seconds, or they're going to dry out. So if you have to plant on a hot sunny day, just be as quick as possible. Try to provide some shade when you do it. Or you can kill your plants or just give it transplant shock, which means they get a little sick, and it takes a while for them to bounce back. And same, like best time to water, early in the morning if you can, or if you can't, late in the afternoon, evening. Hopefully you want, do it before. The only part about night, if you're watering it, right before night or at night, you want to make sure just you water the soil as much as possible, because if you water the leaves at night, you could get some fungal issues. But again, like, you got to do what you got to do. So it's not a big deal if you do it every once in a while, but try to get a routine where you're watering early in the morning or like right after work. And then my best time to harvest, cool in the morning or late afternoon, because if you harvest your lettuce like in July in the middle of a hot day, it's going to wilt really quickly, which you can throw in ice water and it'll bounce back. But it won't. You have to eat it right away because it won't bounce back very long. Okay, so Shane wrote a question about the leafy greens. Would this work for other leafy greens with a video? I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think any kind of loose leaf. I think that was mainly like for loose leaf stuff. Like mesclun mixes and spinach and things like that. Yeah, I don't know how it works well with all leafy greens. But yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I don't quite know. Um, but definitely, I mean, feel free to email me, or if you have a specific one in mind, and I can definitely research it for you. All right. So then, seedlings you want to plant really deep, particularly tomatoes. A great thing about tomato is like any part of this plant, and with most plants, any part of this plant can become another part. So like if you plant, a branch into the soil, it could become roots. Um, or different parts, leaves, yeah, it's very versatile, especially with tomatoes are the best at this. And a lot of times, tomatoes, if you don't grow them right, they're kind of tall and leggy. So the best thing to do with tomatoes, even if it's like a healthy tomato, is kind of bury it deep. Ideally, like two to two-thirds of the plant, which I know looks like really sad. You got this beautiful tomato plant, and then you bury it most of the way. You don't have to do quite that much. I probably do half, half as much. But I mean, it looks sad, but the thing is everything that you bury is suddenly going to become a root system. It's going to become a root ball, and it may look sad for a little bit, but then it's going to, once the roots established, you're going to have a much bigger root system pulling up more nutrients and water, and it's going to, within a couple weeks, it's going to be bigger than the plant that's planted at level. So this is great for tomatoes. You can do some of them with like especially like if you grow like some like cool weather stuff like chard and kale and stuff. I mean, they get really leggy, but you can, when you pot them up, you can kind of rebury them and stuff. But if you have like really leggy plants, definitely bury a little bit in the soil. But tomatoes for sure, and especially if you have like a really shallow kind of pot, you can actually put the tomato on the side and then prop it up like this, and then it will turn into a big root ball. All right, potatoes. So a couple people were talking about potatoes. So potatoes are really fantastic for this area. Really easy to grow, except for it does cause a lot of maintenance. Well, not a lot of maintenance, but a lot of labor on hilling them. You have to hill them up, which we'll talk about in a second. But mainly with potatoes, you don't want to typically use grocery store potatoes because a lot of times they've been treated, sprayed with different things and not, propagate, or not germinate. But if you have a potato that's sitting in your cupboard and you see a bunch of eyes growing out, then you might as well go for it. But if you're looking for where to get potatoes, farmers markets, for sure, and seed catalogs I mean, are really are places that you want to get your potatoes from, and they come, and the idea is like they have these little eyes and stuff. So when you order, ideas you want to kind of, yeah, you just need a couple of these eyes, or like two, maybe three typically, and you cut them in half, plant them, and then from these little, eyes, that's where the potato plant starts growing again. But potatoes, yeah, you have to kind of plant them a little ahead of time. You typically you plant them in spring. So right about now, particularly in April, is when you want to plant potatoes. But depending on what type of potato you want, is how long it stays in the ground. So if you want an early season, if you want it, just to grow for a couple months, those are smaller potatoes. It get 75 to 90 days, mid season, late season. So you're harvesting those, in the fall. So it all depends on if you want these big potatoes. They stay, they need to stay in the ground longer than as opposed to the smaller earlier seasons. And then they have what's called new potatoes, which is basically when you harvest potatoes early, when you want those really tender potatoes, but they don't store very well, so you have to eat them fresh pretty quickly. But yeah, like the idea is like essentially you want to you want to plant them, right about now in spring, or in April. And then depending on, you want to make a note, depending on when the potato, how long, what type of potato is, how long it takes. But generally potatoes, when the tops of them will die. And that's a good time to kind of harvest them. So you plant them in trenches. I can never remember like spacing and stuff. Like I have to Google everything, right before I space it. But that's why I wrote them on notes. But it's like typically like 4-inch deep trenches and 12 inches apart. They have the eyes facing upward, and then but then you want the tough part about potatoes though is they'll start growing these leafy greens, and then they grow upward, the bulbs, so you have to, as they grow upward, you after every time they get like 6 or 8 inches of vegetation, you got to kind of take a rake or something and bury half the plant, or 2/3 of the plant. Because the potatoes, they're not shooting, roots down into the ground. And then like sweet potatoes shoot their roots in the ground. Sweet potatoes and these kind of potatoes are different, plants, but the sweet potatoes, shoot their roots in the ground, and then they the bulbs form there. But these the bulbs form the actual plant, so you have to keep on a couple times throughout the year, as you have to keep on reburying the plant, as 2/3 of the plant. It's called mounding up, or hilling up. And it could be a lot of work. But I mean, other than that, though, they're pretty great, and pretty easy to have, to take care of. You definitely don't want to avoid green potatoes. They can be pretty toxic.
I
Um,
have a question.
yeah.
Someone mentioned that what you're saying seems like it's really not easy to grow them in a container, but someone mentioned that was easy to grow in a container. What's your thoughts on that?
Mm. Yeah, it is. That's my next slide. So in containers or bags, but they have to be versatile and not just like a normal container. You need to, or if you could have a normal container, but you don't want to like if you have a container, you don't just want to fill it completely up with soil and then bury a couple, potatoes. You want to do that thing where you mound them up inside. And a lot of people will use sacks. Like coffee ground sacks. Like I know Compass Coffee. If you go into their store, on 7th Street, I think, in the Shaw area, right when you go in, there's a big pile of these burlap sacks and they just give away. You can grab a couple, and the idea is you kind of roll them down, really low. You put, only about, a foot of, soil or something. Put a couple of these, potatoes, and then as they grow, you keep on adding soil inside the sack. And then to they get to the top. And you can do that. I've seen people do this with like these wood boards, where they'll add a new wood board every time it goes up, and they'll keep on adding soil. And I guess you could do this with a container but again, you got to start out, just a little bit of soil in the bottom container. Put your potatoes in, and as the leaves start growing upward, that you keep on adding soil, because that's what I was explaining. Like the potatoes, the bulbs actually form upward, as opposed to sweet potatoes where the roots grow downward and they form downward. So that's why, yeah. So I mean, that makes it a lot easier with these kind of things. Like you don't have, like if you're using a sack or a container, you don't have to keep on mounding it up, which could be a lot of work. You could just, when it's, to the top, you just dump the whole thing, and then grab your potatoes. The only thing I would recommend, like especially with burlap sacks, is you have to water them a lot. They do dry out really quickly, and maybe with containers they wouldn't dry out as much. But I know people that try this. I know a lot of people do this and they're very successful. But usually, when people aren't successful, it's because they're not watering enough, because it dries out so quickly, as opposed to planting it in the ground. And then yes, someone Stacey said, I've had a good success with using straw to hill them up. I just pile more straw on top of them as they get bigger. Oh, that's really cool. So instead of like raking up soil, you just keep on adding straw to the top of it and let it. Yeah, oh, that's really cool. And Joey said old tires work too. Yeah, you definitely want to be a little bit careful with old tires, because any kind of industrial thing can leach out some nasty stuff. But yeah, if you do it right, maybe prime it or whatever, for sure. Cool. But yeah, with old tires, the kind of same thing. You kind of keep on adding a tire as you hill them up. All right, now let's talk about sweet potatoes, which is a different type of plant, even though they look, very similar. This is actually a tropical plant, and what's one great thing about sweet potatoes is you can grow what's called, potato slips. Where one sweet potato, it's same with the eyes, but there's a way where you can grow a whole bunch of slips from one potato, and you can plant it out. So if you have one sweet potato, you can ideally create 40 or 50, sweet potato plants from that one sweet potato. And traditionally, I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways. And I'm going to actually show you a video on another way after this. But the traditional way is like the science experiment way. You get some toothpicks, put the potato in the glass, you fill it up with water on the bottom end. I remember I failed the first couple of times I tried this, and it's because I didn't change the water regularly. So if you do this, you want to change the water, once, every day or every other day, or it's just going to start rotting. But then you'll get roots on the bottom that start appearing, and then from there, a couple weeks later, you'll get these little, the eyes, and then they'll grow in these little slips. And then once you get, the slips, or which are just basically new potato, sweet potato plants. Once they get like 4 or 5 inches or so, you want to just pluck them off, put them in a little glass of water. Wait another week until the roots form, and then you can put them straight into the ground. And then each one of these is like a whole nother sweet potato plant that can produce 20 or 30 more sweet potatoes. So you can, with one sweet potato, you can start a whole sweet potato farm. It's pretty crazy. And other people have had success where you just instead of doing this toothpick thing, you just cut the sweet potato in a couple pieces, keep it in water, and then they'll start sprouting as well. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I want to play this one video of this another way to actually do that I thought was really cool.
In years past, when I've grown sweet potatoes, I've started them the more traditional way by putting toothpicks in the sweet potato, and you can see the roots here develop, and then eventually I just noticed you start to get a little sprout here. It always takes a long time, and I wanted to try something a little bit different and that would hopefully be a little bit quicker. So instead, I started some in soil, and these were both started at the same time, and this method has been so much faster. This method couldn't be easier. All I did was take a foil pan, poke some holes in the bottom, fill it halfway with potting soil, and then nestle the sweet potatoes in it. I put it under my grow lights and on a heating mat in my seed starting station, and before long, I was amazed to see that the potatoes had already kind of rooted in the soil. That was my first clue that this method was going to be a lot quicker. And then I started to see these sprouts form. This is what we're going for. These are sweet potato slips. You can see these long slips. So I've already harvested 2 different sets of sweet potato slips. These first ones were from about a week ago, and you can see the roots are already growing pretty good on these. And these were just from a couple of days ago. I harvested another batch of them, and they already have some small roots going. So let me show you what I do. So when you get the slips, these long kind of sprouts is maybe a better word for them. You get these long sprouts, and I just kind of cut it off at soil level, strip the bottom leaves, and I'm simply going to put it in a jar of water and let it root. And once these roots have formed, this is what you're going to plant in the soil about 4 inches deep, 18 inches apart, in order to plant sweet potatoes. That's how we grow sweet potatoes. So you can see from this, I'm going to have lots and lots of slips. I'm going to be sharing these with everybody who comes to my gardening class next month. So I'm going to have lots of sweet potato slips before these sweet potatoes have even really gotten started. I'm really excited to share this method with you. Give it a try and get some sweet potato slips growing. Thanks. Thank you so much for watching.
Cool. I haven't actually tried that, but I want to try it out eventually, because I've tried the other ways and it does take a little while. All right. So if anyone's growing corn, so corn's not probably the most common for urban farming, urban gardening, just because corn, each one of these stalks you may may only get like 1 or 2 actual ears of corn, so it's a lot, so it takes up a lot of space. It could be difficult with pollination as well, but if you do have the space, or definitely, because traditionally, like What's tough about corn is the pollination. So you have the pollen is on the tassels on the top, and that's where the pollen's is. And the pollen, once it gets loose, the wind will blow it around. The idea is it's wind pollinated. It's not insect pollinated. So the wind needs to blow it to the to the other corns around there, and then it needs to cross pollinate each other. If you ever had like a corn ear and there's a couple the little kernels missing, that's because on the silks, each one of those silks has to get a piece of pollen in order to completely fill the whole corn up. So yeah, you need, I mean, that's why traditionally you see corn grown in large fields, in these boxes about a foot apart, and then the wind, wherever the wind blows, eventually it pollinates it. And what big problem now is a lot of like GMO corn, a lot of times that like there'll be the patented corn from like Monsanto or something, and then like that will blow over to an organic corn, like a mile down the road, then suddenly they cross pollinate, and then it's a whole yeah. Not only is that corn not organic anymore, but also there's like patent issues all of a sudden. Yeah, that's a big reason why a lot of like organic corn growers or people that can't do a big box and just has just want like a line of corn on the side of your house, that's probably not going to wind pollinate itself. So that's why a lot of people will bag pollinate. They'll hand pollinate corn, and that's pretty easy to do. You just get a couple paper bags. When you notice like the pollen, when they start getting loose, you put the paper bag over this top, tie it, the bottom, and then leave it on there for like a week or so, and then pull it off, and it should have a bunch of pollen on it, and then you put it over the silks and tie it, and then shake it up a little bit and leave it on for like a week or two. And if you do that, then and that's really important, like because a lot of times when I see corn growing in the city, it's not a big big square. It's usually like a line of corn in the back of a yard or something. So if you want to increase your chances of pollination, definitely try it. Yeah, try this out. And then asparagus. So asparagus is a really fantastic plant. It's a perennial plant. It takes a while. It takes a couple years to really get going. But once you get it going, you can harvest it for decades. It's a very long lasting perennial plant. And what how you get these is like you order them from seed stores or nurseries, and they come. It's basically their root system. Comes. It looks like this crazy like daddy long leg. And the idea is you want to pick a spot that it's going to be there for a long time. So you want to pick a spot that you're okay with, having asparagus for the next 20 years at. So a lot of people, dig a trench. They'll make a little, small hill on top where they can spread the roots off, around, and some people they dig a trench like potatoes, they could kind of hill up. I've never done this. I've always just planted it at level, and it seems to be fine. But yeah, so you plant, so you plant it, it takes the first couple of years, you just kind of mulch it, you water it, it'll come up as like really like, thin, stalks and lots of fronds and stuff. So that, you just take care of it. You don't harvest it. But by the third year, it becomes up, big enough where it's like, pencil size where you can actually, start harvesting it like you see in the store. And that's great. It comes up, like springtime, and then the idea is you want to harvest it for like a month, maybe like a month and a half, basically until you see it start slowing down, because then you want to stop, because then you don't want to harvest too much, because then it's going to take away, it's not going to rebound every year, as well. So you want to, maybe harvest it for a month and then stop, and then let it kind of regrow. And then from there, and then you wait next year, and you get another like month or so out of it. And if you keep on doing that, if you allow it to kind of rebound itself, you'll have a really healthy plant for decades. And then we talked about perennials. We talked already about that. But all these perennials we're talking about, asparagus, rhubarb, rosemary, all these things, they get so they'll get so dense and woody sometimes that it's a good idea to kind of dig up some of these when they're dormant. Especially like around like the end of winter, like February, March is a good time to kind of dig them up as when they were just as a root ball, and then you can take a shovel, you can take a saw, just cut it into different pieces, and then you can spread plant it around your garden, or you can put it in pots and give it away to gifts and things like that. So there's lots of different ways to divide plants. We talked already about strawberries. It shoots these runners that have these baby plants, but if you just clip the connector stem, and then you can dig up this baby plant and plant it anywhere you want, and it'll just keep on sending runners. And strawberries are fantastic. They're just they just multiply every year, but so quickly. um and then there's a concept called intercropping that so this is the idea. So you have like this is the idea of thinking about mixing up fast growing and slow growing plants. So like these are cabbages, seedlings. So they're going to take a long time. Cabbage, like especially big cabbages, can take months to get to mature. So in the meantime, you have all this exposed soil that's taking a while. That's like drying out. So what you can do while you're waiting for these guys to get big is you can plant a bunch of fast growing things like radishes, or spring onions or arugula in between, and then radishes take like a month or so and you can harvest them, and then after by the time you harvest them, hopefully like the cabbage is getting ready to kind of take over the whole space. Same with like we talked about like lettuces. If you want to grow lettuces and stuff in the winter or during the summer when normally it's so hot that it's going to bolt, you can plant a row of lettuce in between your tomatoes, and the tomatoes will kind of shade it for a while. Eventually the tomatoes will get so big they'll smother it. But as they're like young tomato plants, you can get maybe a couple rounds of harvest your lettuce before these tomatoes get so big that they just take over the whole area. So that's what intercropping is. It's kind of matching like slow, it's like taking advantage of slow, growing plants and sticking in like some fast growing things around it. And you can also intercrop as you change seasons. We have like a spring, a summer, and a fall season. A lot of people they'll grow their spring crops up until May, and then they'll rip everything out, add some compost, till it up, and then they'll plant their summer stuff, and then they'll rip everything out in August, and then plant their fall stuff. Or you can do what's called, you can do like intercropping, where you don't rip everything out. You kind of gradually kind of, change, your crops. So this is a great example. Like this was a spring garden where they had, these, lettuce heads. They were growing. So this person was he would move a couple lettuces heads out as he was probably eating it. And then he would replace it with like a pepper plant. So the idea is slowly over like the month of May, you're slowly, as you're eating these lettuces, you take the whole thing out, and then you replace it with a pepper. So the idea is like gradually, that way you don't have this break, where you have to go like a month or two in between. You have to wait for everything to grow again. You're kind of slowly phasing in and out. So there's less of a break of like veggies, of like harvesting different things. Like these are, someone put tomatoes inside these lettuces, and as they harvest more and more lettuce, it's going to make more room for these tomatoes, and then eventually it's going to be a tomato garden once all the lettuce is harvested and eaten. So a couple things to think about, like also um some things to think about, like brassicas, like particularly kale. So a lot of times when kale and stuff, when it's done, it'll bolt. um and then that's a good sign to kind of remove it, because once it bolts, it gets bitter. That's when it gets like hot. It gets too hot. These cool weather plants get too hot and they'll bolt. Everything gets bitter, and then they start dying, and they attract. If you leave it in the garden too long, they'll attract insects and diseases and things. But one thing I found is like, I just found this out recently, that like kale plants, when they bolt this really delicious flower. It's like a broccoli rabe. It's really, really delicious. So sometimes I'll wait, for everything to bolt. I'll cut them off, and then I'll remove them from the garden. So, all right. Sorry, so maintenance. Let's talk a little bit about how to actually maintain and keep your garden healthy. And like probably the best thing you could do is mulch. I see people like in the middle, especially in the middle of summer, like you got water like every day, but then if you mulch your garden really well, you're watering like twice a week. It's really, yeah, I definitely can't emphasize enough. And not only that is it reducing the amount of times you have to water, but it's also doing, it's regulating the moisture of your soil. And that's where if you have like ever have like cracked tomatoes and stuff, that's because there's an inconsistent moisture level. And they'll overgrow, and then they'll, dry up. There's different like blossom end rots. There's a lot of diseases and stuff where if your soil is like different consistencies of moistures, it's hard for plants to pick up things like calcium. So having a nice mulch, it not only keeps everything moist in there, but also it adds organic matter to your garden. It suppresses. It doesn't completely block, but it suppresses some weeds. And at the same time, like things like tomato diseases, like you definitely want to mulch, tomatoes, because a lot of tomato blights and diseases are in the soil. So when it rains, it splatters up all the soil onto your tomato plant, and then you can have a lot of different types of diseases. So yeah, mulching is a really fantastic idea. There's a couple different mulches you can use. Straw is a fantastic, really great one, and you could get bales of straw, at like Ace Hardware, Home Depot. You want to make sure it's straw, not hay. Hay is like like a when you cut down a whole wild field of grasses and it's got lots of seeds in it, because hay's for horses, you want to you want that protein. Straw is like a farm grain like barley, where all the seeds, most of the seeds at least, are chopped off, and you're just left with mainly stalks, so you're not actually adding grass seeds to your garden. So straw is really great. I really like shredded bark, like shredded wood bark kind of mulch. And my favorite, if you can pull this off, is like a living mulch, like white clover. White clover is like the shortest of all the clovers. And if you plant like you plant your cabbages first, and then let your cabbages get a head start, and then you kind of seed white clover around it, and then it'll grow in. And not only is a nitrogen fixer, it's adding nitrogen, but at the same time it's kind of cooling the soil and keeping the moisture level. But the main thing you want to know is make sure is don't add too much mulch. You want to have about 2 to 3 inches. If you add like 6 inches of mulch, it's going to prevent the water from even getting to your soil. So you want to have a nice layer of like 2 to 3 inches of mulch. You want to avoid things like hay, wood chips. Wood chips aren't good mulch. I mean, wood chips are really great for paths, but when you use it as a mulch, I mean, they're still composting, they're still breaking down, so they can actually suck up some of your nitrogen in your soil to continue composting. They'll redeposit it back into your soil, but it's just it's not healthy for your plants, and it can kind of rob them of some of your nutrients. Wood chips, I only use wood chips on paths. I don't use that directly into your soil, but yeah, shredded bark, straw. Avoid that dye mulch stuff. Anything that's got dyes in them, they typically use like kind of toxic dyes. It's not going to kill you, but it's you don't want it in your garden. So yeah, definitely don't use like the bright red or the bright brown mulches. The only downside of mulch is you're giving some extra cover for things like slugs. So you may, if you laid out some mulches and you notice a couple weeks later you get something's chewing your plants, you can definitely you may have some slugs. But what's great about slugs is it's really easy to kill slugs. Those beer traps, putting a little beer in an extra saucer and putting it in your garden, that works really well. Putting a couple rocks in your garden. During the day, and they'll hang out underneath the rock, and then you just kind of flip them over and squash them, or going out at night with a headlamp and squash them. So it's not a bad. I think it's definitely worth it, even with with the squash, but or with the slugs. So, question: do you think the shredded wood bark mulch would help with the cats? Oh, I don't know. Maybe, yeah. I guess, yeah. I think it would actually, because yeah, they want that litter like feeling that your soil is giving. So yeah, I think it probably would. Yeah, I'd love you if you try it out, and if it works, let me know.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's another question. My soil has such bad drainage that there's moss growing on it. Should I mulch? Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, if your soil, I mean, that's the problem. If the drainage is really bad, you want to try to figure out how to, increase drainage, because I mean, it's gonna, it's not gonna be good for your plants. But yeah, if you get to the point where you got green moss, I wouldn't mulch. I would want the sun to kind of help me dry it out, so I didn't drown my plants. But that's kind of a bigger problem though, is if you have bad drainage. Um, yeah, 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 I probably wouldn't mulch, but I also wouldn't leave, a bad drainage situation. I would definitely try to figure out different ways to deal with that drainage. Um, which you could definitely email me, and I can work with you on that. And then garden covers, something to think about. A lot of people think they're too much, they're not worth the effort. There's two different kinds of covers. There's that landscape fabric. If you ever use landscape fabric, I mean, it works really well. It allows water to get through, and it cools things down. It keeps weed. You don't have to weed. You just punch your little holes and let your plants go, and grow there. But the only problem is like, if you ever want to, remove that landscape fabric, all the, roots and, grow, like fuses into this landscape fabric, and it's like a couple hours of like, like pulling that stuff up. It's a pain in the butt. Um, so, but if you think you're going to stay in the same spot for a while, then it might be, a good idea. And then a lot of people will use this like, it's kind of like corn plastic, covering. You see this more in commercial, where they cover the plots, poke holes in it. You definitely need drip irrigation for this, because this stuff, water is not going to seep through. And then at the end of the season, you can actually till it in, and into your soil, and actual breakdown. And um, yeah, I just wanted to kind of show you these two options, but for sure, yeah, not a lot of people use these options anymore, just because I mean, unless you're like more of production farms, but I mean, yeah, it's up to yeah, I don't know, it's up to you. Um, and then okay, so there's something. If you're growing tomatoes, you definitely want to know how to prune tomatoes. So pruning is really important, if you want to have a lot of fruit, because the tomato plant, I mean, if you just let it grow, it'll just get it just gets so leafy and so dense that, and it just like ends up using most of its nutrients for its leaves. It has, a lot of fungal issues because it's not getting sunlight or circulation, and you just don't get a whole lot of produce. I mean, you can just like grow your tomato, let it grow on the ground. I mean, it'll be an unhealthy tomato, but you'll probably get some tomatoes. But if you want to like maximize your production on tomatoes, you definitely want to prune them, and you want to trellis them. You want to get them off the ground, because as I was saying, there's a lot of diseases, for tomatoes in the soil. So if it's growing along the soil, you're going to have a lot of diseases on your plants. But pruning your tomatoes, it's kind of a step process. The first thing is you want to wait till you get your flowers. That's where your fruit's going to come about. So once that happens, I remove all the leaves below the flower, because these are never really going to produce fruit. It's just going, the flowers are going to form up on, above the flower. They kind of move upward. So we might as well remove these bottom branches. Plus, they're going to get so big, they're going to start touching the ground, getting insects and diseases and stuff. So remove those. And about that time, you want to look for what's called suckers. Suckers are these little plants that just pop up, these little stems that pop up in the armpits of the tomato. It's a good idea if you're growing tomatoes, a couple times a week. Just like check your tomatoes, and if you can get them small enough, you can just pluck them right out with your finger. It's not a big deal. Um, but if you let them grow, they want to be a whole nother tomato plant. So it's just going to suck up lots of energy. It's going to use a lot of energy for the leaves and that for fruits, and it's just going to get you're going to have a mess of a tomato. Which is again, you'll still get some fruit, but it's better if you want a nice tomato plant that produces a lot of fruit and is very healthy. You want to have either like you want it to look like a tree with one central stalk or maybe two stalks. And then you prune it, to allow air and circulation, and to keep the energy really focused on producing fruit and not more vegetation. Um, so that's yeah, and then yeah, yeah, that's yeah, that's basically it. Sorry. Um, but yeah, definitely like every couple day, every a couple times a week. Check whenever you water tomatoes. Right after watering them, check the tomatoes and pull all these suckers. Because if you can get them early, it's so much better. And eventually, I just give up. Eventually after like my tomatoes like 6 feet tall or something, I'll give up and just let it sucker. But you want to try to stick with it as much as possible. Also, a question: why is it important to pinch and not cut off the suckers? Well, so you can it's just easier, and you're not when you pinch them, you'll get the full sucker will come off, and if you try to cut it, you'll probably leave a little stump that might rot and be a vector for diseases and stuff. But once it gets so big, you can't pull it off. If you try to pull it off, you'll actually cause some damage, and that's when you need to get like some pruners and cut them off. So yeah, if you get them within like 6 inches or so, you can just pluck them off. Anything bigger, yeah, you should definitely cut off, or it's just going to take a big chunk out, or worse, it's going to like strip the outside. If you pull it off, it's going to strip the outside bark of it, or skin of it. Someone asks, is this advice about tomatoes true for cherry tomatoes? Oh, so yeah, yeah. Let me first go back. Sorry. Uh, for most cherry tomatoes, yeah, this is what you want to do, or something similar to it. Mainly you want to trellis things. So there's two different kinds of tomatoes. There's indeterminate tomatoes, and these are tomatoes that will grow for a long time. They keep on growing until basically the winter comes and kills them. And they can get when you see like 6 feet tall tomatoes, these are indeterminate tomatoes, and they'll keep on producing all season long. Now they'll slow down as like as it starts to cool down. A lot of times when you have tomatoes, they'll be they won't produce fruit, and that's because they need to have a certain temperature and a certain amount of sunlight to really be productive. And if it starts cooling down, they'll be less productive. But yeah, and then the other type of tomatoes is what's called determinate tomatoes, and we'll talk a lot more about that determinate tomatoes during the container garden class, because they're the ones that you want to use for containers. And you can also they're great outside too, but they only get about 4 or 5 feet tall. You don't need to do a whole lot. You don't need to trellis them typically. You don't. I mean, I would still prune prune them a little bit, but they're not as crazy as an indeterminate. And the thing about them is they produce all their fruit at in a short period of time. And they're like that's why they're like sauce tomatoes, like Roma tomatoes, Ruggers tomatoes. Like not only do they make great sauces, they produce they produce all of their fruit within like a month, and then as opposed to indeterminate tomatoes that are producing fruit all season long. So yeah, they're better. I mean, most people typically grow indeterminate tomatoes. That's typically cherry tomatoes, and your really delicious, fresh eaten tomatoes are indeterminate. Most, a lot of sauce tomatoes, yeah, that they're still good, but you really want to use them for sauces are determinate tomatoes. So definitely, yeah, when you're picking out your tomatoes, make sure if they're determinate or indeterminate. But yeah. All right, and then yeah, thinning your plants. So this is what you want to do with like really small things like carrots and lettuces and things. A lot of times what you do when you plant these is you kind of dig a little trench, and maybe like the handle of your shovel, and then you just kind of sprinkle seeds in there, let them grow up, and then once they get their second their first true leaves, the first leaves that they come up are these what's called cotyledon leaves, and they all kind of look the same. And then their next set of leaves are when it looks like a carrot or it looks like a kale plant. And so when that happens, you can start thinning them. Or sometimes like these are beets, yeah, so I don't know if beets. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I can't remember if they have cotyledon, but most plants will have cotyledon leaves. So once you get the second ones, or once they get a couple inches tall, you need to start thinning them out, or else they're not going to produce like carrots. You're not. They need to be spaced out every 2 inches if you want to have a nice sized carrot. And same with beets, and same with radishes and stuff. So you need to thin them out. And the easiest way to thin them out is just to get some scissors. Pick your favorite carrot and then thin out. Cut out every single thing every other carrot for every 2 inches. So ideally, is you have this thick, thing of carrots, but you want to go in with scissors and basically cut out 1 carrot every 2 inches. You can also harvest them, as like beet greens are actually super healthy for you, full of iron. So you can, and especially when they're baby greens, they're really delicious. So you can, harvest a little bit, at a time. So maybe harvest enough to do a salad every day. And then slowly over time, you're going to, eventually end up with like a beet every 2 inches. And then the last thing is you can actually transplant them, where you can actually, get like a spoon or something. You could pull them up, and then you can kind of space them out into, and you could start new rows, and kind of, you try to save as many as possible. You just kind of space them all out so they're 2 inches apart. And that's what our next video is going to be about, is actually transplanting carrot seeds.
Here we are in the urban seedling home garden with Terrasca hissing. These are beautiful carrot seedlings that are all clumped together in a nice big clump. It is very hard to not have clumpy carrots because the carrot seeds are so small. If this is your case, you can certainly transplant them very delicately because root vegetables do not like to be transplanted. So what you want to do is just get right in under, try and disrupt the roots as little as possible. Break them up, and you really want to have one of these beautiful seedlings per 2 inches. So you can have 16 per square foot. It's honestly better not to transplant. So if you have a bunch like this, best to just choose the most beautiful radish carrot and remove the rest. But if you do want to try transplanting radishes, just grab your radish seedling by the leaves, because the root and the stem are precious, and the leaves will just grow and grow. Do a nice big hole with your finger or with a pencil or a chopstick. Drop it in. And close up gently. You want the soil level to be at the same soil level that it was when you took them out of the ground, which means that all the white part should be covered. Anything you start from seed needs to have its own area to grow. So this is going to be true for beets, for your beans, for anything that you're planting from seed. Make sure that you have enough space for each seedling. By the leaf, not the stem or the root. Oops. That should work out. If you are going to transplant your carrots, they should be this size, very tiny. Any bigger, and it's pretty much too late. You want to get it before the first set of true leaves come in. Next, I'm going to go through and space these beets a little bit better.
All right. So there's a question. When you cut the leaves while thinning, you don't have to make sure the roots are pulled up. Just by cutting the leaves, it will stop the growth. Yeah, for sure. You just have to, just cut them at the base. And then yeah, the roots won't keep on growing. They'll die. And that's actually, it's great. This is the best way to do it, because when you pull things up, you're kind of disturbing the roots and all that stuff. But if you just cut them at base, the roots will actually just decompose and add organic matter to your soil. But yeah, if you want to get a lot of carrots out of this, and if you have the space, definitely try to go for the transplanting. All right. Another thing I want to talk about is crack plants. I'm sure if you've grown tomatoes, you've seen these. I used to think it was like a caterpillar or something that was just like crawling over a tomato, eating like a trench. But this actually happens when at different. We talked about with mulching. Why it's important is because when you have different consistencies of moisture in the soil, like if it rains really hard, for a couple of days, and your plants, your tomatoes super thirsty plants, they'll suck up a lot of water. They'll start really growing the tomatoes really quickly. And then let's say the next week is super dry, and the soil dries out. Well, it kind of overgrows, so it kind of goes back a little bit and it cracks. So it's still edible. It's just not going to preserve very long. So definitely, the best way to prevent this is just to mulch, to make sure it doesn't it has a consistent moisture level, so it doesn't overgrow or undergrow. It just kind of grows at a typical speed. And same with cat. I never heard about this before, but someone told me about this. A couple people have told me about this. Like, the same thing can happen with cabbages. If it sucks up too much water, it can overgrow and it gets dry, it'll crack. Someone told me if you actually grab a whole cabbage, pull it up like an inch and then like twist it a couple inches, like you rip off a lot, like half of its roots, and then that will slow it down a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I heard that was true, but I've never actually tried that. And but just throwing it out there, something to research. All right, so cucurbits, so pollinating cucurbits. Cucurbits are your squashes, your pumpkins, your cucumbers, melons. So these are great, but a lot of people will, typically will plant at least a couple of these because the pollination is bad. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes because they have both male and female flowers, and sometimes you'll have all the male flowers will open up with the pollen, and the female flowers will be closed, and then the flowers will dry up, and then the female flowers will open up, and then you have no fruit because there's no pollination. So that's the idea. If you get multiple plants, they'll have a better likelihood that when all the female flowers open up, there'll be a male, flower that a bee can, grab the pollen and go into the female flower. Or, if you only want to plant one of these cucurbits, because they take up a lot of room, you can hand pollinate them, and that will ensure that you have 100% pollination. And essentially, what you want to do is you want to wait till a lot of your female flowers start opening up, and then you can tell the female flower because it has that ovary, and then you cut the once that happens, cut off a male flower, strip off of petals, and then just kind of do a little hand pollinating, to all the female flowers. And if you do that, you're going to have like 100% pollination. It's a really effective way. And then it's good to keep a couple male flowers ready. So if there's more female flowers to open up, you can cut another male flower and pollinate. But eventually, you're gonna run out of female flowers, and then all the male flowers that's left over, you can actually cut those out. And you can actually eat those. Like I really love like stuffing them with like ricotta cheese, baking them with some honey. You can make fritters out of them. Like squash blossoms are super super delicious. And then there's flowers that have all the I forget all the technical names, but I mean, it has all the parts in there where it actually self-pollinates itself. And that's like tomatoes and most of your nightshades, like eggplants and stuff. And they're usually fine. Typically a lot though, they rely on like buzzing insects, like bumblebees are big, are the pollinators for these. So like a bumblebee will you get in there and they'll shake everything, and then that's what it shakes loose all the pollen, and then it like pollinates itself. But if you don't have bumblebees, or you don't have one thing you could do is you can go out to and then kind of shake it a little bit with your hand on each one of these flowers just to make sure they pollinate themselves. And then I have a gardener that would have one of those sonic toothbrushes. She would bring out and sonic toothbrush each one of her flowers just very gently just to make sure it pollinates. So this is kind of like she's taking it to the extreme. I mean, your tomatoes will pollinate most likely, especially well, we have plenty of bumblebees and stuff. But if you're ever having trouble fruiting, you may want to think about self pollen, you're giving it a little shake, or getting a sonic toothbrush. And it is a thing called blanching. Well, blanching is like two different things. We'll talk one about like when on cooking class. I mean, blanching is something you do to like preserve, vegetables. But another thing, another definition of blanching is like keeping certain parts of plants very tender by keeping it keeping sunlight away from it. Cauliflower is a big one. So cauliflower has that nice tender white um fruit right in the middle of it. But if the sun hits the cauliflower, it'll start getting a little bitter, a little woody. So a lot of times, if you're doing cauliflowers, you can actually tie a couple of leaves together, and that will keep it shaded and keep it very tender. But they do make like self blanching cauliflower. That's supposedly where the leaves kind of enclose themselves. Um, to the point where you don't have to tie it off. So it's definitely, if you're going to do cauliflower, look for self blanching ones that the leaves naturally kind of cover up, or just if it's exposed, you just want to get a couple leaves and kind of tie it a little bit just to keep it very tender and sweet. And you could do the same thing with celery. Celery is really hard. It's a really thirsty plant. You got to stay on top of it with watering. You got to water a lot, and you got to hill them up a little bit. But you can also, to keep them tender, you can actually wrap newspapers around them. That will keep the sunlight from kind of making them a little bitter. All right, so I think this is the last part we're going to talk about today. Our trellises, definitely. There's a lot of reasons why you want to trellis. One, get healthy plants. Two, increase your space. If you let a watermelon just like kind of grow on its own, it's going to be like 20 by 20. But if you can get it up on the trellis, or like tomatoes, if you get them up on trellis, all of a sudden it's only taking like a square foot. So you want to try to grow vertically as much as possible, and it protects it from like soil diseases and insects, and it adds more circulation, so you have less fungal issues. So yeah, try to trellis as much as possible. There's certain things that all you need to do is just like put something for it to climb, and they'll climb on their own. Like peas, you just put like a bamboo, just shove it in the ground next to a pea plant. That pea plant will start circling and climbing that plant. Same with beans and cucumbers and melons and certain vine squashes. But then there's things that you need to actually kind of help it out. Tomatoes are like the biggest one. Like you want to like tie them up. They don't naturally just climb trellises. I really like this Velcro tie. It's reusable. The main thing is you don't want to tie it super tight, because you're going to choke your plant. You want to allow it to like have some room so it can expand and grow. But yeah, let's talk about a couple different types of trellises that you can use. I mean, the most common, like easiest one, go out and buy $5 for a tomato cage. The thing about these tomato cages, they're short. They're only like 4 feet tall, and you're indeterminate. They're great for determinate, but indeterminate tomatoes are going to get 6 feet tall. So it's like to kind of I mean, it's better than nothing, but if you have the time, I like to make my own tomato cages. I make it out of what's called concrete remesh. You can get these at like Home Depot if you go to the concrete aisle. They're like $1 or so for like a big piece, and you can get some like clipper metal snips, and you can actually cut them, and you can make your own cages that are like you can get them to be like 6 feet tall. You just want to make sure you want to use things that you can actually get your hand through. Don't use like cattle fence or something, because if you can't fit your hand through, you're not going to harvest anything. But yeah, concrete remesh makes really great cages. This is a great example, like TPs for beans and peas. You just get some bamboo, tie it on the top, stick, pull all the way things down. You can get a string, wrap it with a string. That will give it a little extra grow. It can grow a little bit better, but I've seen it without strings. Just a bamboo. I mean, if you go on like Craigslist on the free sites or something, or neighborhood listservs, there's always someone with bamboo that needs help harvesting it, because it's invasive. It just spreads like crazy. So you find that person, and you could go back every year, and that person will love you, and then just harvest your own bamboo. And you can make all different kinds of things out of bamboo, like these lean-tos, where you just Yeah, just make the X's and then put the cross beams over and just tie everything. We're gonna have a whole class on creating structures and carpentry and bamboo, structures. So we're gonna get into like the nuts and bolts on how to create a lot of these things. So we're just kind of going over like general ideas right now. Um, and then there's, like, I mean, there's simple ones where you can just get bamboo and just stick it in the ground right behind a tomato plant. And as the tomato plant grows, you just kind of tie it as it grows upward. The only bad thing about that is like once if it's a big tomato plant, once it gets really big, it's gonna, it might fall over. So maybe put some cross beams. Try to, if you're doing a couple of them, try to, reinforce that as much as possible. Um, this is my all-time favorite one. I'm gonna show a video on this one in a second, but I forget the name of this one. But this one is just, ever since I started using this one, it's my favorite trellis. Basically, you create any kind of cross beam, any kind of structure you can, out wood, out conduit, out PVC, whatever, and then you tie a string up to the top and just have the string come down, and you don't even have to tie it to the plant. You just wrap it a couple times around the plant, and then that it has, the tomatoes have fibers where they'll actually hold on to the the string, and as the tomato grows, I just wrap it around as it grows up the string, and then it's like this really great way. It's super cheap, and it's a great way to like prune. It makes pruning really easy. You can get in there, and you do a lot of circulation. You can get that tomato to be super productive, and it's just like very very simple, but it's actually very strong, even though it doesn't look like it. And then this one, if you're doing long rows of tomatoes, this one works really well. Where you just get rebar or some kind of like, T-post or something, hammer it in the ground and then tie a string, a double string, and just have the plant grow in between the two strings. And that's a really great trellis for rows. If you have a really long row of tomatoes, this works really well. So I'm going to play this video a little bit more about my favorite trellis.
Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company. I want to talk about tomato trellises. We've had lots of different systems over the years, and some have been really bad, some have been okay, but we finally found one that we really like, and I want to show it off to you guys. So this method came from Josh Satin of Satin Hill Farms. He is got a really amazing YouTube channel. You should check it out. But we saw this online, and we thought we'd give it a try, and we're so happy that we did. This tomato plant and my row of tomatoes here have never been this neat on our farm, and I give all of the credit to the system that we have now to trellis them. So it's a pretty basic system and very inexpensive, another thing we really love. This is just 3/4 inch conduit. We have some T-posts here and some PVC tees. Basically, what you see is how you put it together, really simple. The posts are driven into the ground. We run the conduit through the tees so that it'll hold it in place. And that allows us to have a structure strong enough to hold really heavy, indeterminate tomatoes. All the tomatoes in this row are all indeterminate varieties that get really viney and long, and we just really need a lot of structure to hold them up. One of the issues that we have with a lot of the heirlooms that we grow is that they get really big, long, and then you can't keep on top of pruning them. So by having a system like this, it's very easy to keep the middle of the plant open for good airflow, and it looks great. They look healthier because I have a good system to trellis them on. So if you look down here, you can see that I've decided to go with 2 liters. So I have the main part of the plant here. I have pruned off every single leaf on the bottom. That's a really good idea, especially if you're in an area that gets lots of late summer storms. You want to keep any splashing up off the leaves. That actually helps with managing disease. So I've got my main stem here, and then I decided to go with 2 liters. You can decide to go with 1. We have enough space here that it warranted going with 2. And then I simply trained it to 2 different leaders. I have gone through and I've picked off the suckers. Suckers are the little part of the plant here that grows between the sun leaf here and the main stem. And you can simply, when they're this little, just break them off. The reason why you do that is this
if you leave this plant to grow naturally, this is going to grow off into almost a whole new tomato plant, and it's going to suck energy from all these flowers here. The point of growing tomato plants is to get tomatoes, right? You don't want a massive plant that just gives you one or two little tiny tomatoes. So by taking off these suckers, you're going to help control where it puts its energy, which is really important. So I'm following up the leader and I'm picking off any suckers. Here's another sucker here. Pick that guy off. And again, I'm picking the sucker off so that it sends its energy up into here. If I were to let this grow and get really big, it would be sucking all the energy from this cluster of flowers, hence the name sucker. So you want to get rid of those. So I've got my 2 leaders here, and I'm just simply winding them up the string. Another reason why I really like using the conduit is because I can slide the string and open my plants up. I like being able to have good airflow in here. If I let this get clustered and covered in all kinds of leaves and vines, that's going to be a good place for whiteflies to live, aphids, and then I also can't control the tomato hornworm, which we will get later on in the summer. So overall, it's just a beautiful system. It works really well. It's inexpensive. I love that I can use the string and these clips can come on and off at any point. So I can change how I want to do it year to year. So there's a lot of systems out there. I encourage you to try them all depending on your location and your needs. But for us on our farm with our row crop style planting, this system really has been the best. So give it a try and tell me what you think.
All right. So if you notice, you had those little plastic circle clips. See if I could, like right here. So that's one way to do it. I mean, yeah, we tried them last year. I wasn't a huge fan, but I think a lot of people do like them. But you got to get multiple clips and kind of go upward. I just take the string and I just wrap it around. But when you notice, like, if you do that early on, it will start, growing into that string, which hasn't, I haven't seen any negative effects. I mean, I feel like it is kind of, struggling a little bit. So it's nice to kind of like loosen the string up, like maybe like every other week, kind of just like loosen the string up and allow it to, like, into the stems to kind of fatten a little bit more. But really, even when the ones that we didn't do that and we just let the string, the tomato kind of, the stem expand into the string and grow into it, they still grow. They grew really well. So here's a question: are there suckers that should be picked in cucurbits and other trellising vegetables, or just tomatoes? I just know about tomatoes. I don't know if anyone else knows about suckers on other plants, but yeah, I just know about tomatoes. I've heard about like people like pruning cucumbers and stuff like that, but I don't really know what they're doing it for. The only thing I typically prune is my tomatoes. And then if you have really heavy things like, melons and like still, try to trellis them. I mean, if you have the space, just let them grow on the ground. But if you can, you just got to build, heavy duty trellises. Like this is a squash net that you could build out, conduit or PVC, and the net comes. And then the idea is like these heavy, gourds and stuff can grow on there, and it's pretty heavy duty. Like doing like this is the remesh, making like, strong structures. I really love this. I want to do this someday where you actually have like a what's that called? Not a pavilion, but a pergola. So if you have a pergola, you can kind of grow your plants up here, and this person actually is like hanging their squashes in like it looks like maybe pantyhose or something. That's the thing. You do want to like some of these things. I mean, they will fall if you don't give them support. So you can give them like little hammocks, netting, like pantyhose and things like that. You just give it a little bit of extra support, or eventually they could fall off. But we actually on our rooftop farm, we actually like trellis. We had our melons actually grow up and over the edge, and they were like hanging like 20 feet off the building, and it was really cute, cool. And like the small things maintained, but we had a couple things that actually dropped on the ground. So it's nice to give it a little bit of a little bit of a support. And then okay, so last thing I'm going to talk about, I should be able to be done by 8:30. Um, so we talked about, if you're growing cool weather stuff in the winter or in the summer, like lettuces and stuff, they're going to bolt because they're going to get too hot unless you give them a little shade and give them extra water. And we talked about you can plant them behind a tomato plant or in between. You can intercrop them, give them some shade, but you can also just get shade cloth as well. And they make different, like 30% to 50% shade cloth, and you can, create low tunnels. We'll have a whole class on how to make low tunnels and things like that, or just like make, get some stakes and stuff, and just, there's lots of different ways you can actually shade your crop, and you don't want to completely shade it. Like I said, you want to have like 30 to 50% shade, so it still needs sun, but if it gets too much sun, especially the summer sun, because in the spring, I mean, we may have like 8 to 10 hours of sun, but in the summer, I mean, it's like 14. It's just too much sun, and overheats these plants. So if you block a lot of that sun, you can actually grow cool weather stuff all summer long. And that's one reason why how people like Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are really hard, because um because we have such small cool we have such short spring. Our springs are like basically like 2 months long, and our fall is like 2 months long, and Brussels sprouts needs like 4 to 5 months. So I finally found someone that had showed me how to do it. Where this gardener, she would plant them in the spring, and in the summer she would give them shade, so they wouldn't, they would still be happy. And then she would harvest them in the fall, and she would have these beautiful, huge Brussels sprout plants. So and then row covers. We're going to talk a lot about this during the pest class, for sure. And we'll get into what bugs to look for when and things like that. But just something that for pest protection. So there's two different kinds of you can get these. These are like, they're called Remay or Agribon. They're named after the companies. Where they allow sunlight to get in, they allow moisture and water to get in, but at the same time, you can use them. If you get thick ones, you can actually use them to keep your plants warm over the winter, or you can get really thin ones, and they can actually use them for to keep insects from eating your plants. Like if you have really bad insect plant problems and you want to stay organic, and there's like a floating cover where you just hanging over your small plants and put rocks down to keep it in place. Or once your plants get taller, though, you need to make a low tunnel, which we'll talk about that in our carpentry class, where you can either use PVC, get rebar, and just put the PVC over it and bend it. Or if you don't want to do PVC because PVC is a little toxic, you can bend conduit and things like that, which we'll talk all about that on the carpentry class. Yeah, we'll definitely, I mean, yeah, we'll go over a lot of this stuff as well in that carpentry class, and then the pest and disease classes. But yeah, that's tonight's class. Here's some more books. If you want to learn more about you want to dive a little bit deeper, we have most of these books in our tool library if you want to borrow any of them. But yeah. Let's see. Oh, I have one question. I have had good luck with using row covers for my cucumbers and green beans. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Especially like the cucumber beetle, or the yeah, it's just devastating. And the best way to you using row covers is a great way to protect them, especially when they're young. And then once the plant gets bigger, it can handle more. So but